This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Smile, the makers of the brand new PDF Pen Scan Plus for iPhone and iPad, as well as PDF Pen, PDF Pen Pro, PDF Pen for iPhone, PDF Pen for iPad, Text Expander Touch, and Disc Label. Find out more about all their great products at smilesoftware.com. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the Talk of the Mac community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, it's time for another interview with a Take Control author, and it's one that I think you're going to find very interesting, not just because the author is Michael E. Cohen, but the book is Take Control of Pages, and there's been a bit of controversy surrounding Pages recently, so we're counting on Michael to have it all make sense and tell us, how we move forward most effectively. Michael, it's great to have you back. Thanks for being here.
Oh, glad to be here, Chuck.
Okay, so you heard the introduction, Michael.
Right.
And Pages, Pages has been good up to this point. Some people would say great. I'm not sure I'd go quite that far, but it's certainly been a program that I've relied on for a lot of things. And then we get a new version of Pages on both the iOS platforms as well as the Mac. And it doesn't quite measure up, does it?
No. And there are reasons for that, actually. And you're actually wrong about what Pages runs on. It runs on the Mac, it runs on iOS, and it runs in your browser.
Okay.
And that, in fact, is the key to why Pages has changed the way that it has.
Now, wait a minute. Before you go farther, when you say runs in my browser, I assume you mean through iCloud.
Exactly. Well, I mean, Pages documents that you store in iCloud, you can access through your iCloud account in your browser and edit them in a browser window that looks remarkably like a Pages window, only it's running in a browser. And you can be doing that on your Mac or even, God forfend, on a Windows machine running Internet Explorer.
Oh, that's ugly, Michael. That's really ugly.
It's ugly, but it's true.
Okay. Okay, so I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but I wanted to make sure we were clear on what you meant by in a browser.
I mean exactly that. Your application, the application you run to edit your Pages file is your browser application. And you go to the iCloud site and you open up your document on that site, and it opens up in a browser window with all the Pages interface in it. So you can edit the file, you can do fonts, you can move stuff around, edit headers, edit footers, that sort of stuff.
Okay. So this is why we are having some of the challenges we are with Pages right now?
It's not because of the browser so much, but it's because of where you go in the browser, and that's to iCloud. It's the iCloud play that's really driving all of this. In Pages 4, you had Pages 4 files, you could do all sorts of incredible things in them. And you had Pages on iOS, and you could do serviceable work on your iPad and even on an iPhone. And you could store your documents in your space on iCloud. And when you brought them from your Mac to your iOS device, you'd often get a warning saying, Pages doesn't support this, and that, and so we've removed it from your document. So when it ends up back on your Mac, suddenly stuff you had put in your document had changed. Because they were sort of compatible, but not feature compatible. And because they weren't feature compatible, the iOS version would just kind of discard stuff that it didn't understand. So yes, you could round-trip files between your Mac and iOS, but only with a limited set of features. Otherwise, your document would get screwed up. Well, iCloud is hugely important to Apple right now. And what they're trying to create is a world where your stuff is your stuff ubiquitously. Whether you're holding an iPod or an iPhone or an iPad, or you're on a library computer, in Oshkosh on vacation, you go to the public library and you log on and you bring up Internet Explorer and edit your documents there, or whether you're on your Mac, your stuff is always there. But to make it always there, Apple had to completely redesign the file format of Pages documents, and not just Pages, all the iWorks documents, numbers, and Keynote files as well. And to create a common file format that all the versions of Pages would understand and not mess with, they cut back to basics. They did this before. They did this with iMovie, where they suddenly come out with an entirely new iMovie, and they had to keep the old version of iMovie around for people who just couldn't afford to give up the features they had. They did it with Final Cut Pro. They went to Final Cut Pro 10, and the editing community went insane because they cut it back to the basics and then began to build out again. What they were doing in each of these cases, among other things, was building a common file format and programming paradigm to make the stuff you worked on work on a lot of different systems in a lot of different ways and move towards the future. But that meant they had to cut back to the beginning. And Apple, unlike some other companies, is not afraid to say, okay, we're going to start over and try again. So that's why Pages changed. They made Pages change so that in Pages 5 on the Mac, and Pages 2 on iOS, and Pages for iCloud, documents can move from one to the other seamlessly. If something on a particular platform isn't supported, it's just ignored. You get a little notice saying, you can see these things, your document may look different, but don't worry, everything's going to be okay. If I put a paragraph in a font on my Mac that's not available in iOS, it comes onto iOS and suddenly everything shows up in Helvetica. But when you look at the font list, you'll see two versions of Helvetica. You'll see Helvetica and then another Helvetica with the name of the real font in parentheses. It remembers what font that should be. And when it goes back to the Mac, it ends up back in that font again, the right font. And so in order not to break documents as they move through the cloud, they cut back to the bare bones and started to build Pages out again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I want to make sure, though, that what you just said, the Helvetica, like with the proper name of the font in parentheses, that's what's happening in the new version of Pages.
That's what happens in the new version of Pages when you open a document in iOS that doesn't contain the font that you put in on your Mac. It remembers the font that should be there. It shows you a font that's readable on your screen, so you can continue to edit it just fine. And then when you go back to the Mac, it's back in the right font because that font information was stored in the file all along.
But this is not what was happening in the previous version of Pages.
In the previous version, it would just switch the font out, and when you got back to the Mac, it would have whatever font the iOS version shoved in its place.
Okay, I think that's a really critical point because a lot of us are still, trying to edit things and work in the old Pages simply because it still has the capabilities. And to Apple's credit, they've left the old Pages on my machine. So
that's right. When you install the new Pages, it takes your old Pages and creates an iWork 09 folder in your application folder, and it shoves your old Pages in there, it shoves your old Keynotes in there, and it shoves your old numbers in there. And so all your old apps are still there. And you can use them. And they do not conflict.
Right. But they also don't preserve things if I cross devices.
No, the old ones will not.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think there's been a bit of confusion about that point where you're afraid to send anything to the iOS device because you're afraid you will lose changes or updates or formatting or transitions or whatever. And you're saying that with the new Pages, that's not the case. You can edit them on other devices. Well, you can edit them on an iPad or on iCloud. It just may not quite look right there, but when you bring it back to the Mac, it will look okay?
Yeah, that's exactly what they're attempting to do. So far, with a couple of minor hiccups that I've encountered, it continues to be the case. The minor hiccup actually happened just last week. Apple released Pages 5.1 and an update to the iOS version as well, and they changed the version that runs in iCloud. One of the things they added was the ability to password protect a file. But in doing so, they actually changed the file format. So the first thing to roll out, the first thing that was available was the iCloud version. So I said, oh, cool, I want to see what this does. So I go into iCloud, and there are Pages documents, including the one I'm using for screenshots in the book that I'm writing. We'll get to the book. And I, edit away and go, oh, this is really cool. Then I go back to my Mac version. It says, oh, you can't edit this file. You need a newer version of Pages, which isn't around. So suddenly that file was no longer available to me. I got the same message on iOS. Then about 8 hours later, as Apple servers cranked up the update mechanism, updates for the iOS version and updates for the Mac version started to be able to be downloaded. Once those were in place, my files were editable again. But because the updates happened at different times of the day, there was a window where the files were no longer compatible. In which case, Pages on the incompatible platforms just didn't let me open it up at all. There was much wailing and gnashing of teeth until I realized what was actually happening. But it was only like, a 7 or 8 hour discrepancy between Pages for iCloud in the morning and Pages for Mac at night.
Which may be a lesson as to why you don't want to necessarily jump on those updates as soon as they come out.
Well, the lesson really is, don't jump on the updates until they're available for all the platforms that you use. And in my case, of course, I have to use all of them. And in fact, it's not really 3 platforms, it's kind of 3.5. Because Pages for iCloud is 1, Pages for the Mac is the other, and then Pages for iOS is like 1.5. When you edit a document in Pages on iPad, you have a slightly different user interface than you do on the iPhone. For example, on the iPad, above your virtual keyboard, there's a lovely little format bar. There's all sorts of shortcuts for, fonts and indenting and doing tabs and like that. That's not available on the iPhone. To do those sorts of things, you have to go into a mode that allows you to do them. Go into an insert mode, for example, to insert a tab or something like that. And so things look a little bit different. The ruler in iOS can be displayed on the screen at all times on the iPad because you got enough screen space to spare. On the iPhone, where space is at a premium, using the ruler where you set the tabs and paragraph indents, that's a mode. You go into ruler mode, you make your fiddly adjustments, then you tap a done button, the ruler goes away and the changes you made take effect. So it's more modal on the iPhone. So in fact, although it's the same application, you download the application once for iOS and it runs on either platform, it has 2 distinct ways of behaving depending on the platform. That's why I say it's sort of like 3.5 versions of Pages.
Michael, we kind of jumped right in here to Pages, and it's a lot to absorb. But I want to circle back.
For you, geez, for me.
Well, but let's circle back to the book for a second, and then we'll continue on with the Pages discussion. This book is being done a little bit differently. You take control people are always trying things, which I really love because you're trying to find, I think, the ideal model or adapt your publishing models to the situation, which, and this does seem to be an evolving situation. So tell us about this book and how it's being produced.
Well, one of the things Apple has done to their credit is they have acknowledged that Pages is not what Pages used to be. And they put out a couple of announcements about that, saying we're planning in the course of the next few months to add this, that, or the other thing to Pages. Which means that if we were to write a book about Pages, we would be updating it every 2 months or sooner. The first Pages came out in November. Then there was an upgrade about a month after that, and then there was an update to Pages 5.1 just last week, which added a couple of features, which made some of the stuff I said about the ruler wrong, some of the stuff I said about inserting page breaks on iCloud wrong, because they added in features. So it would be impossible to publish a book about Pages until it was done, and how long will that be? It's going to be updated regularly over the course of this year, as far as I can tell. That meant we had to take a slightly different approach, plan for that change, but get the book out as quickly as possible. So in fact, the book is being published right now as a pre-book. It's half written. Half the book is done, and we're going to be publishing it as it stands through a service called LeanPub. And when you go there and purchase the book, you get the book, and you will get emails every time we add something to the book and make a change. And over the next few months or sooner, I'm going to be adding the additional chapters to it and adding information about the features that have been added since the last time something I wrote had been changed. And we'll be able, within a day or two, to update the book at LeanPub, and everybody who's purchased it will get an email saying, new version of the book, and they just go there and download it. And so, in a sense, this is the 21st century equivalent of what someone like Charles Dickens would do. He'd say, I'm writing a book. Subscribe to this book that I'm writing, and you'll get monthly numbers till it's done. Well, that's kind of like what we're doing here, except it's happening on the internet, and it's coming via email, and it's happening in a more haphazard fashion. But it's sort of a serialized, work-in-progress, advanced reading copy.
Okay. And to let's be clear here, this is different than the usual kind of take control updates.
Right. Take control, traditionally, since the very beginning, you would purchase a version of the book, and maybe 6 months or so later, if there was enough information necessary to make an update, the book would be updated to, let's say, version 1.1. And if you purchase 1.0, you could download the 1.1 update free. And that you could continue on that path until we did a complete rewrite from top to bottom, and that was a new edition, and then you pay again. What we're doing here is making the update process a lot more incremental. So the updates will be coming more quickly, and we can do it without the book being completely finished. What I did in organizing the book was decide to put a huge amount of information into one great big fundamental chapter. And then the following chapters would be specialized topics and advanced topics. So if you only had that one fundamental chapter, you'd still have enough to really get you going with Pages 5 and Pages on iOS and Pages for iCloud. And by organizing it that way, when the pre-book, I love the idea. When the pre-book comes to you, you'll get this great big chapter which is titled, Where is Everything? And then the chapter attempts to answer that. It's about 80 pages long and has about 55 screenshots and other stuff in it. So there's a lot.
Okay, so an obvious question, at least in my mind, that I think people are going to ask is, how will you know when the book is finished? Whatever finished means.
You will get an email saying it's now officially version 1.0 complete, and you can download the final version from the Take Control site or from LeanPub as your choice. Because once it's complete, then we'll be selling it on the Take Control site as well, and the other places we sell the books, the Apple iBook Store, O'Reilly, I think there's another outlet that I'm forgetting. But we still Take Control books in those outlets right now. This book will only be available from LeanPub until all of the chapters are written. And when the book is finally complete, then it becomes an official 1.0 Take Control book purchase the regular way you do all other Take Control books. Except, of course, if you published it from LeanPub while it was in progress, you get the final book as well and all the subsequent point updates that we might do for any other Take Control book.
Okay, so usually we do this kind of thing at the end of the interview, but this is such a new model. I want to be sure we're clear on this. So if after listening to this, and by the time that we release this, the pre-book will be available. Mm-hmm. Am I going to takecontrolbooks.com, or am I going to somewhere else, or will Take Control Books have a link to the link?
I haven't seen what Adam is intending to do on the Take Control site. But I would sure be astonished if he didn't have a Take Control of Pages page on the Take Control site, which shuffled you right off to LeanPub to buy the book there.
Right.
So, yeah, it will be on the Take Control site. The cover will be there, but it will just direct you, I believe, to LeanPub. But also we've got, a mailing list of some 31,000 people who have bought Take Control books over the years who get all of our publication announcements, and they'll be seeing the email saying, guess what's available? With handy-dandy links you can click on right there.
Got it. Okay. And of course, if there's any doubt, folks, just go to MacVoices.com to the show page. I'll make sure I have a link straight to wherever it is that you need to go on the Take Control site to learn about the final model and how it's all
Right.
going to work. Because this
this
is something new.
This is a real experiment in agile publishing, and it's you couldn't do it with every book, but it just so happened that there's the way word processors work, and one of the decisions I made in writing the book was to decide, it's 2014, you've all seen word processors. You all know what they do. You all know that there are ways to put headers, and there are ways to put footers, there's ways to format paragraphs. You know all of this stuff because you've been doing it for years. There are very few word processing novices at this point who are over the age of 6. In which case, that's why the fundamental chapter is called Where is Everything? It says, okay, you knew word processors could do this sort of thing. The big question you always have when you go to a new one, and Pages 5 is a new one compared to even Pages 4. It looks radically different. So your big question is, where the heck do I find this? Where the heck do I find that? I want to put it in a footnote. Where do I find that? I know I can do it. I just don't know how I do it here.
Right.
It's like, you move to a different city. Well, where do I buy bagels?
Okay, Michael. So you just you just made a comment that I'm really kind of surprised at. Is Pages a word processor? Or is it a page layout program? Or is it both? Why do you refer to it as a word processor?
Oh, that's because it is. Even though it is a layout program, it's used primarily by people who are doing word processing documents. The default templates you get are word processing templates, and has been for quite some time. Pages is, used a whole lot by students. It comes on, your Mac. You buy a MacBook Air, you go away to college. Pages is a word processor you'd have. It's the one you write your papers on. So it is one of those things. It does page layout stuff as well. Pages 5 does it kind of sort of less well than Pages 4. One of the things that was lost in the big transition that will probably be coming back are linked text boxes, which were great for page layout, where you put a text box on a page, and if text overflowed it, you could draw a different text box on another page, and then link them together so text would flow from one to the other, kind of like you can do in iBooks Author, too. Well, that linking is gone. You still have text boxes in Pages 5, but the text just sits in there. You can't link to a different text box. You have to work a little bit harder on that. There's only one linked text box in Pages, and that's the body text, and that's the only thing that flows from page to page to page. Instead, what you do, as a matter of fact, in Pages 5, you grab a template, and then you click a little button in the format inspector saying, omit body text. And so now all you've got is the decorative stuff, and you can start slugging stuff on the page and do the page layout stuff you always could, except for linked text boxes, of course.
Which leads to a question, I guess. And it's really not going to matter in some ways, because if the feature that I'm depending on is not there, then it's a real problem. But how feature complete is Pages at this point? We know it doesn't do a lot of things that the old version of Pages did, but what would your percentage be? 50, 60, 70?
Well, there's something in software development called the 80-20 rule, and that's basically, you want to focus on the 80% of features that most people will use and wait to do the other 20% until, you've got something complete. I'd say Pages is right around the 75% mark on the Mac, maybe the 60% mark on iOS, and maybe the 45% mark in iCloud, depending on what you want to do. I don't think you're ever going to want to do page layout stuff, with all sorts of objects, fancy brochures in your browser. It may eventually evolve to the point where those features are all available on the iCloud version as well. Similarly, on an iOS device where you don't have access to all the fonts in the world and a huge, library of graphics and everything else that you would have on your Mac, you might do some basic page layout stuff, but you'd mostly be doing word processing stuff there too. It's when you're on your Mac where you do all of that stuff, and so that's why that's the most feature-rich part of Pages right now. And I think it will continue to be. But they're again, building it out, and they're going to be taking it in interesting directions. At least, no matter what you do on your Mac, when you put it on any of the other platforms, you can certainly work on it and edit the text that's there in something that you created on your Mac, even if you can't, apply a different object style to an object, or make a new style sheet on, the iOS device. You can still use the styles that are there that came from the Mac. So it kind of works that way.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, it's really encouraging because it's not something that I've experimented with enough to know, and thank you for doing the experimentation for me, that I can now use the newest version, move it around through my devices, bring it back to the Mac, and I'm not going to have trashed things that I maybe worked very hard on the Mac and then moved it over to iOS and on the old version would have destroyed them. So that's huge.
In fact, I have a little sidebar that gives you a useful tip for that. Partly because the Pages file format has changed, but the file extension hasn't. It still ends in a .pages is the name of the file extension. So if you have a Pages file and you double-click it on your Mac, which version of Pages opens up if you have two? That becomes something of a problem, and it will usually open up to the new version. However, since using a Pages 4 file in iCloud is problematic because of loss of features as you move from one platform to the other, you may want to keep those documents restricted to just using on your Mac. So all your old Pages files, edit them on the Mac, forget about the other devices. They're interesting, they're fun, but don't think about them right now. Your old Pages files, if you want to maintain complete fidelity, leave them on your Mac. Anything you're working on Pages going forward using the new features and that you want to have ubiquitous, store them in iCloud from the get-go and keep them in iCloud. That means in the Finder on your Mac, you can then say, when I click on a Pages file, it always opens up Pages 4. And that's fine because you can't find your Pages iCloud files in the Finder. I mean, they're there hidden deep inside your library if you know where to look, but you shouldn't go there anyway because it's like a swarm of bees. Just stay away. Okay?
Okay.
But instead, if you go into Pages, it shows you a file dialog showing you all your iCloud documents, and those will be your Pages 5 documents. Keep your Pages 5 files in iCloud. Keep your Pages 4 files on your Mac. And you'll never run into that problem of, oh my God, it just stripped everything out that I held so near and dear to me.
That's a great tip, and it's an obvious solution. Well, It's obvious after you know what you've just told us. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I had a brainstorm midway through writing part of the section on opening and saving files. I said, this makes sense. iCloud is the whole driving force behind Pages 5 and Pages 2 on iOS to begin with. That's what's really driving this thing forward. If that's the case, let's just jump in with both feet. Everything I do in Pages with this new version, I'm going to do in iCloud. I won't see them in the Finder. They'll be available only in Pages, just like any other iOS device, only shows you its own documents, no other app's documents. Everything's nice and segregated in that world. And leverage it that way, even on your Mac, and you'll be okay. That's not to say it's really hard to get a file from one place to the other. When you open up Pages 5 on the Mac and you see the iCloud list of all your files, you can click on one of those files and just drag it to your desktop, and it drags it out of iCloud and puts it back in the Finder. Or if you have something in the Finder, you can drag it from the Finder and drop it in that window, and it's moved. It's not copied. It's moved from the Finder into iCloud and stored in that special secret location and available to all your other devices.
Got it. Okay.
So it's not all that hard to do. But you have to think that, iCloud is my portal to my new documents.
This edition of Mac Voices is sponsored by Smile, the makers of the brand new PDF Pen Scan Plus for iPhone and iPad, as well as PDF Pen, PDF Pen Pro, PDF Pen for iPhone, PDF Pen for iPad, Text Expander, Text Expander Touch, and Disk Label. Find out more about all their great products at smilesoftware.com. Smile isn't only the longest-running sponsor of Mac Voices, they're also one of my favorite companies to talk about because they have such great software across the board, as well as great people. With all the focus on the iPhone and iPad, it's easy to forget that PDF Pen and PDF Pen Pro are the best ways to OCR, manipulate, fill in, edit, and do all sorts of things to PDF documents that you can't do elsewhere. And we all know the world runs on PDF documents. And Text Expander has to be my most used utility, period. It helps make short work of routine tasks in email, website updates, and more. One quick, maybe obvious tip is that you can create a Text Expander snippet for the day or just for a special project and then delete it. It takes literally seconds to set one up and can save you time when working through tedious, repetitive tasks. A side benefit is that it cuts down on typos. When you type something repeatedly, you get faster. You also get sloppier. A Text Expander snippet is the perfect quality control method that speeds things up instead of slowing them down. Those are just two of Smile's many great products. Learn about all of them at smilesoftware.com, download trial versions of the Mac software there, then buy direct or find them all in the Mac and iOS app stores. Smile. Great software for your Mac, iPhone, and iPad. Thanks to Smile for sponsoring this edition of MacVoices. Michael, is there any reason, again, other than just functionality, that you shouldn't move to the new iCloud? Anything that, any gotchas that we're not aware of?
Well, I think the biggest gotcha is if you don't have an iCloud account, then you're basically taking a downgrade in what Pages can do for you. Because the big feature of Pages 5 is your documents available anywhere you are. And if that doesn't matter to you at all, if you're in front of your Mac and that's your device and that's what you do all your work on, and you don't need to be able to get to your stuff anywhere else, and you already have Pages, stay with it for a while until the features are built out in Pages 5 at least. Apple doesn't take it away from you. It still does everything it did since before Pages 5 came out. So, it's got everything you need and everything you want for everything you've done all along. So stay there. There's no reason to jump into it unless you need that iCloud ubiquity. Then suddenly it becomes a really important play.
Yeah, and I guess that's the approach I've taken because at least with Pages, now Keynote's another matter, and that's a whole other discussion. But most of my Pages documents, I haven't needed to do the editing or have the availability on iCloud or on my iPad or iPhone for that matter. So I feel like at least this one hasn't really affected me that much. In fact, I've stayed away from it. But now I feel a lot better about it because I know I won't be potentially destroying the document if I do that. So maybe I can change my workflow a little bit and make it a little more efficient.
Right. For someone using something like Keynote, in that case, what I would suggest you do is you keep your development copy on your Mac and you move a copy into iCloud and hope that it will play in the iOS version and restrict yourself to just the thing the iOS version can do, and you'll be fine there as well. I think word processing documents become more problematic only because something like Keynote, you can't use all the transitions and everything in the world unless you're like a super duper guru of Keynote displays. You basically just want to throw words up on the screen, click a button, have them slide away and bring in some more words. And you're pretty much happy with that, and you can do that cross-platform and you're not going to lose anything. But when you're dealing with word processing, people are sensitive about text and the appearance of text on a page. They want the exact fonts they want the margins they want to be able to place objects here and there and elsewhere and do very fancy and precise layouts because, they remember the print world and how gorgeous that was and still is. So, in that case, you don't want things to be screwed up when you go from one platform to the other because it matters a lot more. And also, word processing documents can be a whole lot bigger than even, a pretty heavy Keynote presentation. When you're dealing with hundreds of pages instead of like 20 slides, big changes can matter a whole lot when they replicate down through that 100 or 200 pages.
Yeah, and a lot of us don't deal with 200-page documents, but for those that do, yeah, that can be a little bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, it can. And, I think a lot of people in certain businesses and walks of life really do that, an annual report from a company, can have lots and lots of pages of tables and charts and stuff like so things can really build out.
Yeah, and
surprisingly so.
Yeah, and a legal brief, I guess. To be fair about it, I guess I'm speaking with a little bias because I don't create 200-page documents that often.
And God love you for it, because you can be real tired at the end of the process.
Yeah. Michael, tell you what, let's zoom out to like the 10,000-foot level here.
Okay.
And what is your opinion of this strategy of Apple's? Is it really the future going forward? Is it to compete with Google Docs and some of the Microsoft products that are advertising more and more things in the cloud?
I don't think Apple is looking to compete with anybody in one sense. That's not what drives their strategy. They think that iCloud is a pretty good deal. Let me back up, I guess maybe a decade. Let's go back in time. Ooh. Remember when the Mac was your digital hub? And that was the big vision there, that you'd have these peripheral devices for playing music, for doing movies, stuff like that. And your Mac was your digital hub. Everything connected to that. And even syncing on the Mac was set up where your Mac was where the truth lived, and you synced your devices to it. Even your phones and like that. And they made a board of devices, a board of attempts to bring in the web or the cloud through things like Mobile Me and stuff, and did, a pretty mediocre job about that. Because the Mac was still sort of kind of the digital hub. Well, that's no longer the case. They're looking at iCloud as being where your stuff ultimately is, where your stuff lives. You buy your books from the iBook store, and you buy your movies from, the iTunes movie store, and you store your documents in iCloud. And they're available to you no matter what device you pick up. If I buy an album from the iTunes store, and I'm playing it, download it to my iTunes on my Mac, and I play it happily. It also is registered on my iPhone as being also available to me for download from the cloud no matter where I am. So if I'm near a Wi-Fi network, or I want to waste, some of my data minutes, that album comes right to me from the cloud right there. It's always available to me. The cloud is what is now your digital hub. iCloud is the digital hub. And the Mac, like all your other devices, are connected to that hub. That's what they're doing. They're not really trying to compete with Google Docs. They just want to make iCloud an important enough center for all of your stuff that it's available everywhere. That's why they've added Pages and Keynote and Numbers to iCloud on the web, so you can get access to your stuff no matter where you are. It's not a collaboration play. Google Docs is something of a collaboration play where a bunch of different people can collaborate on a document at the same time. And it does a pretty good job of that. And it envisions work groups and stuff like that. And when you look at what Pages offers in that regard, it's pretty mediocre. This infuriates Adam Engst, who is a big fan of work group type stuff and online collaboration. He's been involved in that sort of thing since the dark ages, since the long, long ago, the before times.
This is pretty grim there.
Well, since the dawn of computing, the whole idea of collaborating has been very important to how he likes to see things work. And you look at what Pages offers, and you go, it does a pretty crummy job of that. But that's not what Apple's really trying to do. Collaboration is sort of a byproduct of using iCloud. What Apple wants you to do is put your stuff in iCloud for you. You're at the center of things. It's a very egocentric sort of way of selling stuff, but that's what they're really doing. Your stuff available anywhere. Not your stuff available to anybody. Your stuff available to you anywhere.
And at the risk of invoking Adam's ire, sorry, Adam, I have to wonder what percentage of people really work in a collaborative environment as opposed to working on their own.
That's hard. That's hard to say for a couple of reasons. The easier it becomes, the more people will do it naturally because there's a low threshold to doing it. The harder it is to do, the fewer people will do it. So right now, not that many people do it. More people are doing than ever before, and a larger percentage are doing it than ever before because of things like Google Docs and the similar Microsoft plays in that regard. But it's still not. It's not something my mother would do. It would never even occur to her to, share the birthday card she's laying out in Pages with somebody else and collaborate with them on it. It's her card. She wants access to it. Then she'll print it out on her printer and mail it to you.
Sure.
You know?
And that's, and I guess I'm trying to envision, office spaces in various industries and all. I guess there probably is a fair amount of collaboration. Mm-hmm. Scratch that. There's a fair amount of workflow that would benefit from a collaborative environment.
Being able to shuttle documents back and forth to 3 or 4 or 5 different people to add their expertise or their commentary and stuff like that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Pages kind of sort of promotes that with Pages for iCloud. You can share a document in Pages via iCloud to anybody, not just to people who have iCloud accounts, to anybody. It sends them a link, and then they can get into the document and edit it with you through their browser. Their changes and your changes will be integrated. You can even do it in real time. And it kind of does an okay job of it, but nowhere near how well Google Docs does it.
Right. But like you said, the objectives are different.
But it does it well enough so you can do that sort of collaborative thing. But it's certainly not enough for the sorts of uses that Adam would put to it. And he's very right to be disappointed in Pages. It's not going to ever be a good tool for him until it adds those features. And he's right to do so because that's what he does. He collaborates with a bunch of people and does a fantastic job of it. So it's a really fundamental tool for the sort of digital life that he leads. But it's not the sort of digital life that a lot of other people who buy Apple products need. Most of them are pretty self-centered individuals who want their music and they want their documents and they want their stuff with them no matter where they are. And, they say, oh, maybe I'll email you a copy of a picture I just took or I'll text it to you. But they don't want to share it to you at all times.
Right.
They want to keep stuff.
And I want to be fair, I'm not quite sure that I would agree with the characterization of self-centered. That sounds so self-centered.
It's the me generation. It's the me. Yeah, it's all about me.
Yeah, exactly. And, there are times that there's no need for me to share unless I consciously make a decision to share a report, a letter, and maybe a letter. What's a letter? I mean, who sends letters anymore? An email. Although you may want to share that email with a couple of people if we really need to send a letter to our homeowners association about that dog that keeps pooping in everybody's yard. So 3 or 4 people where you live may want to collaborate on a letter. So an email. So good point. Good point. And this is kind of the advantage, I think, of being at the 10,000 foot level because you kind of see the change in Apple's strategy. Mm-hmm. And 10 years ago, I mean, you're right. The digital hub. In fact, I'm not even sure it was that long ago. It was a digital hub because you didn't have the ubiquity of Wi-Fi and wireless and the cloud, and the relative affordability that could be challenged of access to all this stuff. So, I think a lot of us have resisted moving to the cloud because we do have concerns over the costs associated with it. But so far, those fears have been unfounded.
Well, also you have to look at what works well in the cloud and what doesn't. Certainly, if you're collaborating on a movie editing project, storing your files in the cloud could be problematic because movies are freaking huge. They take up a lot of room. But, unless a document is so heavily larded with, graphics and stuff as to be indistinguishable, from from a movie, even a pretty robust word processing file is only a few dozen megabytes in size. Let me just take a quick look here. I think the manuscript for this book right now is maybe 14 meg, 15 meg, something like that. And it's got 50 screenshots, or more, in high resolution embedded in the file. But that's something, I could certainly store in the cloud. It's not going to take up an appreciable fraction of the 5 gigabytes of free iCloud storage I get. So I could put a lot of word processing documents up in the cloud without really feeling any pain.
We're also seeing, I think, like, for example, YouTube. YouTube delivers perfectly watchable videos. On my iPad, my iPhone. They may not be, depending on what resolution I select, suitable for a 65-inch TV. So that, the file size I need to look good on the 65-inch TV, I probably need to dedicate something like to Netflix and pound it down, or a Blu-ray disc. But for a lot of things, you can shrink it down very effectively and watch it on those devices and not be chewing up a ridiculous amount of bandwidth or storage space.
Right. Plus, you have to think about the fact that, when it comes to video streaming or music streaming or any of that sort of streaming for that matter, in most people's worlds, stuff comes down faster than it goes up. So as long as you're streaming video to you from the cloud, you can do that over a home connection easily. It's when you're having to pump huge amount of data upstream to the cloud, then get it back down, then you start running into problems. Most people have what are called asymmetric connections. You get, 30 megabits per second download and 2 megabits per second up. And that's pretty standard with people who have, cable modems and stuff like that. That's kind of, I think, what I get from Time Warner Cable right now. Something in that regard. Uploading a huge file, you start it, in the evening, you wake up the next morning, it's still going. Download a 2 gig file, I've got enough time to go in the kitchen, make myself a pot of coffee, and a scone, and then come back in, and it'll be done by then, because it's coming down that's so much faster.
Right. So we zoomed out to 10,000 feet. Let's zoom back into Pages, because we got a little bit away from that. Your approach to this book, as you said, is going to be more telling me where things are as opposed to telling me how to do them?
The first big chunk is a chapter called Where is Everything? And that's sort of a gazetteer chapter, to say, here are the points of interest. Here's where you find the paragraph formatting function on iOS, in iCloud, on the Mac. Here's where you find how to insert page breaks and line breaks on the Mac, on iOS, in iCloud. Here's how search and replace works and where you find the commands to do it in iOS, on the Mac, in iCloud. So that's what the Where is Everything chapter is all about. It's basically the basics of all the stuff you do in word processing. And the question you're usually asking is, where do I find it so I can get to it and do the thing that I want to do and get out of there so I can go, to my daughter's, dance recital this afternoon, And that's the big chapter, and that's the one that's done and will form the core of the book, the pre-book, as it goes out. It's about, in manuscript, it's about 75 or 80 pages. So it's no small thing. But there's some high-level stuff that I'm going to be covering later. How to manage styles, paragraph styles, character styles, and something called object styles. Let's put a pin in that because I want to get back to it because that's a new Pages feature and it's kind of interesting.
Okay.
Another chapter on how to organize your work, do things like tables of contents, how to do formatted lists, complex formatted lists. There'll be a whole chapter about adding objects that are not text, movies, audio, pictures, how to wrap text around them, the sorts of things you do with that. There's going to be a chapter about using Pages to collaborate, to share documents with other people, either in real time or not, and your options for doing that, the best way to do that. A whole chapter on importing and exporting your work, bringing stuff in from other word processors, exporting out an EPUB or a PDF, and what your options are and your choices there. So I'm telling you how to do a whole lot of stuff, but the big chapter tells you how to do a lot of stuff in a by-the-way fashion by telling you where you find the commands and what those commands do, in this particular environment. But it really does try to answer the question, I really need to put a section break in there. Where do I go? What menu do I pull down to find that? I know I can do it because all the other word processors do it. So where do I look for it? And what does it do when I choose that command?
Yeah, I think this is it's always a challenge when you see things get rewritten, get updated, especially now with Pages, because there are features that are missing you're going to go looking for So it would be very nice of you to tell me, well, don't go looking for that right now because it's not there, or okay, it's moved over here, and maybe it functions a little bit differently than you're used to or than you have been used to, and here's how you do it.
Or I know how to, set a paragraph style on the Mac. Where do I go when I'm on iOS to do the same thing? It's in a different place. And there's also a huge difference between pages 4 and 5. Pages 4, as you know, has inspector windows floating around up the yin-yang. You can have dozens of them open if you like, for paragraph settings, for list settings, for wrapping settings, for hyperlinking, for all sorts of little windows layering on your screen, until it looks like a little post-it file exploded on your screen. Pages 5 doesn't do that. It has a column called the inspector pane, and depending on where you click in your document, the inspector pane changes what it inspects. Click on text, you've got the text format inspector. Click on an object, you have the object inspector with all the things for doing things like bordering in objects and changing its shape and size and everything else. So because the interface is so different, you're going to be asking that question a lot, even if you already know Pages, because it's different in Pages 5.
So in other words, I really need your book to learn my way around Pages 5.
You need 2 copies of it. I need a new pair of shoes.
Well, so how is the pricing going to be done? I mean, if I buy the pre-book, I have access to all the subsequent updates until it turns into 1.0.
Right.
Is that correct?
That's exactly right. So whatever price we set the book at is going to be the price that you pay to get the complete book, even if you buy just the pre-book, because you'll get the full book in the fullness of time.
Right.
No extra charge. I think because it's probably going to be like a 200-page or more book when done. It'll probably be a $15 book, but I actually haven't seen the cover, the version of the cover that has the price on it, so I don't know that for an absolute fact. But I'm pretty sure it will be a $15 book.
This model appeals to me a lot. In this particular situation, I can think of some situations that might not really work in. Yeah. But for this one, you're telling me right now, okay, this is Pages 5 as it stands now, and here are all the things that you don't know how to get to because they've all moved around. And then we're going to backfill a little bit with this is how you accomplish this, and if it's changed, great, and if it hasn't changed, okay, here's still how to do it. And so
exactly.
I like this. I like this. It certainly puts a bit of a burden on you.
It's going to be an interesting struggle because I'm going to have to be writing this Pages roller coaster for months now going forward. That I'll always have a chapter to turn in. Every couple of weeks. Tanya will be on my back. We need something to edit, Michael. Please give us something to edit. So. And Kelly, too. Actually, I have 2 editors. I got Tanya Engst and Kelly Turner. And they're both editing it in tandem. So, I'll go to bed at night, and in the morning, Tanya, because she wakes up 3 hours before I do, being 3,000 miles away, does an editing session, then hands it off to Kelly, who works in her early afternoon. And by the time it gets to me, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon here. And I like to write in the afternoon. So, 3 hands are touching it in the course of every day as we get close to finishing a chapter. It's kind of a lot of fun, Who has the baton? And every version, as we hand it off, we increment a version number in the source file. So I think that the version of Pages, Take Control of Pages that will be released will be version 49 or 50. So it's been through the cycle that many times.
And I can't help but say this too. I see other authors write books, and they even give you their progress on Twitter. I finished chapter 12 this afternoon, and I finished chapter 13 over the weekend. And you just know that there's not a lot of editing going on. There's not, and I'm not challenging anybody's method of writing, but the fact that you go through this editing process and multiple passes and all, it's what makes the Take Control books the way they are. They are boiled down, solid, concise things that I need to know, not a lot of gibberish.
a lot of people don't understand what editing involves, actually, especially for a technical book of the sort that we produce, but actually almost any book. And they think, some 70-year-old Miss Grundy, with a red pencil going, subject verb error, oh, this word's misspelled, and that's the level of editing. Well, that's kind of one part of editing, but there's all sorts of other things too that I really rely upon Kelly and Tanya to tell me, like, oh, you called it pages for iOS here, but you called it iOS pages there. Let's try to be consistent. Oh, there's this thing on the screen. What should we call this thing on the screen? You called it this one place. You called it that another place. Let's nail it down and fix it. This is a great tip, but it would be really great if we're like 3 pages earlier. Or maybe you want to break this section into 2 because it works a lot better that way. And so you get all sorts of developmental edits as well as, this word's misspelled and that, figures in the wrong place. That's one part of editing, but the other stuff, the developmental stuff, Kelly and Tanya are really good at that. And they make me look a lot better than I really am.
Shh, don't tell them that.
Don't show them how the sausage is made.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I guess the book is Take Control of Pages, and it is a little bit different, so we will have a link in the show notes as to where to go for you to get it. The pre-book version, as we do this interview.
Which will become the final version before your very eyes if you just keep clicking those links in your email.
Right, and at no cost to you. Just download the new versions as Michael adds to them and makes corrections and updates, because that's the other thing, too. That there are going to be corrections and updates. We were talking earlier, about what just happened to you, that the latest version changed a few little things, but they're important things.
In fact, we're hoping that the people who buy the pre-book version will actually write to us and say, I didn't quite understand this. Could you explain it a little bit better? Or I need to know how to do this and you didn't cover it. Could you try to add something to that? Or, oh, I see you were actually wrong here. Could you fix that? We're hoping to see reader feedback because, in this publishing model, it actually has an effect on the final product. So the purchases of the pre-book can be involved in the writing of the final book as much as they want to be.
I just heard you ask for email, Michael.
Yeah, well, I'm going to give you a phony email address at the end of the show, so we'll go in the Bitbucket. I won't be bothered, because what do they know? Seriously, we've got some pretty smart readers in the Take Control community. Yeah. And they're, I welcome input from them, quite honestly.
And I don't think enough people take advantage of that for you or for my show. I like input. I'd prefer if you don't, tell me just how terrible everything is. But if you really think it's terrible, okay, then tell me why, and we'll have maybe a discussion about it. Maybe,
as long as you don't start your letter with you are such an idiot. I already know that. You don't need to tell me. Just tell me what you need to fix.
Well, yeah, and it's tough because you're trying to address a lot of people. You're trying to address people that are opening pages or pages 5 for the first time, as well as the people who are really well versed in 4 and they do know how to do a lot and they just need a little bit of guidance. So it's always a challenge. It doesn't matter what you're producing. You're producing for a wide range of audience, and they have to understand it too.
Absolutely.
All right, so by the time that this goes live, the pre-book will be live. You can go and get it. So, folks, go and get it. It will help you make sense of pages. And if you take away nothing from this interview, be sure to pay attention to Michael's differentiation between how to handle pages 4 and pages 5. That will assure that you don't get messed up and you can move into the future, the bright, shiny new Apple future, the way it's intended. What do you think, Michael? That good?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Good.
That's about right.
Good, solid advice. Advice. Hey, thanks so much for being here. We will do it again because I know that you have nothing else to do but write Take Control books.
That's true.
It's good to see you.
I got to get the chain off my ankle. Sorry.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, Chuck.
Take care. Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. Take Control of Pages, the pre-book. Go get it. And we will be back again soon with more Take Control authors, more of everything in the Mac community. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, app.net, Google+, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the MacVoices Dispatch, to stay up to date with all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at MacVoices.com/newsletter. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at BackbeatMedia.com.